Okay, so we're live. Okay, so hey everyone, Darren Mulcahy here from Raise the Bar Training Systems, and you're very welcome to Raise the Bar Live, I think is the way we termed it, okay? So I'm joined here today with Stephen Cusack from City Gym Limerick and Sean Crowe from Strength Militia Systems in Belfast. How are you going, boys?
All good.
All good? Sean's man, a few words.
Hey, how's it going? I was with
Saves them for the impact.
Thanks for joining me, lads. So like we were chatting about just before we press record there, wanted to put together something that would help people of the powerlifting population over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, however long it takes to get back to normality. So regards their training. So just some thoughts on what they can be doing between now and then. Okay. And the second kind of area I wanted to focus on was when we do resume back to normal training, recommendations or protocols that you think a lifter should follow. Okay. So yeah, we'll tackle the first one. And like I said to the lads, anyone on the call, any questions, lads, pop them into the chat and I'll push them out as we go along. Okay, so we'll try and answer the questions live as we go through it. So first one is just training right now for people. So the way I'm looking at it is like, and we have a couple of people in this fall into this bracket. Either you have minimal equipment, okay, or you have either minimal equipment or you have the bare essentials. So by the bare essentials, I mean like a barbell and maybe 60, 70, 80 kilos, okay, which for someone maybe that squats 200 or 250 kilos or whatever it may be, it's substantially less, okay? So that's the way I'm picking up the last couple of weeks, is we have kind of two brackets, those with absolutely nothing and those with a small amount, okay? So yeah, recommendations. I have a couple of ideas and stuff here, but I'm going to pass it over to one of you guys. Steve, if you'd like to start us off, maybe just some thoughts, your own thoughts on what people could be doing or so forth.
Yeah, so I suppose categorizing where people are and making demographics is going to be one of the most important things here, because this isn't a situation that anyone's really dealt with before, and essentially sort of what's happened to a lot of people, the people that we have in mind here with sort of limited equipment or compromised that way, are essentially dealing with a scenario where their exercise selection is severely limited. But for most people, so if you went into this without any significant injuries, without anything like that, there's still an awful lot of training that you can do. You just have to shift the way that you're sort of thinking and looking away from the norm. So with powerlifting, I suppose, one of the three big things that you have at play that you're training are your nervous system, your neural response to training. So getting exposure to heavy weight, that's one of the most important things, being able to handle that. The second thing you have is hypertrophy, so muscle growth. And the third thing is like technical proficiency, or competency with your big three lifts, which are essentially the sport. So you have the proficiency element. If you have limited equipment, so let's say you are limited to a barbell, a few plates, nothing significant, nothing over 50-60% of your 1RM on any lift, you can essentially forget about training your nervous system or neural response. You're going to detrain in that way. When you go back to training, weight is going to feel heavy, that sort of thing is going to occur. But areas which it is very possible to train with limited equipment is definitely your muscular hypertrophy. It's very possible to grow right now, and that's probably where a lot of people need to be focusing, is just sort of changing their focus away to what is productive with the time that they have in training. So yeah, that's one of the big recommendations you can make, is basically just changing your focus away from what you can't do towards what you can, which will be mainly training hypertrophy and working on weak points, and using this as an opportunity to do the things you wouldn't normally do in training is something I've definitely been thinking of. So for a lot of people, when you're in your competitive powerlifting seasons or when you're just chasing PBs in the gym, we tend not to focus on some of the smaller things that you can sort of get away with. Like a lot of people might necessarily be, using our core musculature properly. We mightn't have like, you know, really proper bracing. There's some movement patterns that could be tidied up, which we don't do because we can focus on other things which will give us more bang for our buck in terms of progress. But now is a time where we could maybe focus on that. Things like mobility, you know, like low grade cardio, which will increase your work capacity.
Yeah, there's some brilliant points, Steve. Yeah, they're okay. And we're definitely going to come back to the hypertrophy one because that's one I was thinking about as well. Yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Sean, and we want to come back on those points though because they're really, really good. Okay, Sean, anything you want to add in on top of that?
I was fairly in depth there, Stephen. But
very much so.
Yeah, just to come up, I'm of the same opinion. Whereas people with very limited equipment, obviously the thing that comes to mind is the psychological effect on them, you know, as athletes, because like you says, they've been, as long as they've been powerlifting, they've been, you know, under the bars, like training squat, bench, deadlift and all the accessories and things like that. So to just have that taken away, like straight up, is going to have like a psychological effect. Because one thing that I have been thinking about in this process is what is people's level of thinking? Are they thinking right now that 3 weeks or however long it will be, like 3, 6, 9 weeks, whatever, like somewhere along the line they're going to probably be thinking, am I losing strength, right? And the answer to that is probably a little to moderate amounts of strength. But like you say, when we go back to normality, you're going to find that people will want to rush in to get that hypertrophy blocks in and maybe rush into strength. But like you were saying about the neurological adaptations, you know, the first 2, 3, 4 weeks into the gym, you know, get into the gym, get under a bar and you know, maybe do a couple of doubles or a couple of triples at about 60 to 75% of what your max would have been. Maybe you could decrease it by 10%, you know, to take into effect, you know, the whole situation here. And then maybe work into a hypertrophy block, and then obviously it's with the goal of returning to that, you know, powerlifting phase. But for me, like looking around the athletes that I'm working with, the ones that don't have any equipment, the things that they could be working on is the weaknesses. So even if they have dumbbells or a plate, they could do a lot of single leg work, like split squats or lunges, and, you know, like work in a lot of tempos and even pauses. And, you know, like you could do 6-0-0 press ups, which will hit those muscles that you won't always hit. And especially like the things that you would have neglected when you were in a full powerlifting program, I think that you have the time. That's the main thing that you have in this current situation, is you have time to work on those little muscles that you might have neglected, you know, in everyday life because you're so busy.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing as well, which sort of a very important point there was when you're talking about, say, return to play, when we're on the other side of this, whenever that is, you were talking about for the first few weeks training super light, super sub-maximally, and yeah, just like working in areas that will just sort of get that skill level back up and get you used to lifting again. I actually had a conversation with, you probably know him, Dara, Jack Heavey. He's a 4th-year sports science student from UL, but he has done a lot of research into the area of detraining and breaks from training since this has started. And something he was telling me, which was quite surprising, was basically every study he looked into around detraining, and some of this won't be necessarily applicable to people who are training hard and like identify as athletes, because you can't recruit them into studies, because nobody who's getting ready for a competition wants to be forced to take a break from training for a month to have it researched. But in a lot of detraining studies, they found that for about 3 to 4 weeks, there is no loss of strength at all when people go into full detraining. And that means no hard exercise at all. And so you got to think of, so a lot of people have lost the gym right now and they've lost full access to equipment, but there's so many different levels between not having access to a full, fully set up gym and full detraining. There's so many levels in between of work you can do to mitigate that effect. And even there, it was found that with about in most studies, found about 3 to 4 weeks of full detraining sees no loss in strength at all. So that's, even if you haven't trained up to now, if you've just hit fuck it and you haven't done anything, you still probably haven't lost any strength since lockdown started. What you've lost is your work capacity, maybe a bit of like that tolerance to training, because, you know, if you've taken a month off and you go back in and you try to train hard, it's gonna beat your ass. Like it's gonna be hard. But if you just train submaximally, you train light, you start at a moderate level, it's going to be quite easy to get back to where you were. And yeah, there is a lot of things that you can work on in the meantime. But you just have to change maybe what you see as your short-term goals away from chasing strength right now into sort of more of a delayed gratification mindset or a model of training, where you got to acknowledge that the training that we do right now, while it will be very useful, you probably will not see any definitive reward for it. And I can't tell you how much strength you or muscle you can build through just doing single leg work and body weight, upper body work, and doing, you know, conditioning work, how much fitter that's going to make you. But we know that it will, and we know that it is useful training. So doing it right now will essentially set you up better for coming back to the other side of it. So even shifting for some people with really limited equipment, and the other thing is athlete psychology and your mindset, because it can, you know, the gym means a lot to people. So having that taken away can make it very difficult to train, even though people know that it is beneficial. You know, the social aspect's gone. It's hard. But yeah, every bit of work you do right now basically means you will regress less than if you hadn't done it. If you do no work at all, you're like resigning yourself to regressing fully at like a natural rate of what will happen if you stop. But anything you do above that delays that process and sets you back further towards making progress again.
That's brilliant. Brilliant from two of you lads. That detraining idea, Steve, is very interesting. Like, I know myself, if I was to take 3-4 weeks off, even if I take a week off, I think it's mental more than anything else, but you feel like you're getting weaker, you know. And I think that's common. That's a commonplace kind of thought process among powerlifters, that we take any bit of time away from the bar, that we're regressing at a rate of knots. But as you were saying, I actually looked up a couple of detraining studies myself today, just kind of up to speed with it, and it was the same thing. It was the rate at which they're progressing was not what we would be expecting at all. So my thinking on it is, like, a lot of this could be a lot more psychological than we think. And just to bring us back to the hypertrophy idea, because I think that's really good, right? And whether it be hypertrophy, I think it's worth putting in that even if someone is a couple of kilos above that weight class, even this time might act as maybe like a weight loss kind of stage for them as well, okay? Like hypertrophy, weight loss, like we could put the two of them together and just call them body composition, okay? So like you said, it's taken the focus from my 1 rep max in the squat, the bench, the deadlift, and now putting on body composition for 3 or 4 weeks. And it's just shifting the focus, that's all. And I think it's a case of damage control with some people, okay? If you're a 300 kilo deadlifter and you've only access to 60 kilos, okay? Let's be realistic. Doing single leg RDLs mightn't hold on to your 300 kilo deadlift, but it might just push it out only by a week or two, as opposed to if you do nothing, it might push it out for 5 or 6 weeks. So it's trying to control the damage that the lack of access to our normal equipment is going to have on us. I think that's what we like. Just chatting to a couple of our powerlifters down here, that's what I'm trying to get across. And, you know, I was chatting to Gene on it as well. Like, it's just trying to limit the amount we regress over the first 2 or 3 weeks, and probably could be another 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, whatever it may be. I think that an awful lot can be done if you have a barbell 40, 50, 60 kilos, whatever it may be. I think you can do an awful lot. I don't think it matters of what strength you are. You can still do an awful lot. You can do. There's plenty of ways. We might chat on how we can change it up and how we can make it challenging. But for me, one big way I think anyone can make the training a little bit more difficult is It's just increasing that range of motion, okay, or increasing that time under tension, like you were talking about, Steve. Like specifically if you were working on a hypertrophy goal, okay. But if you're taking, let's say, someone who normally does, we'll just say 60 kilos for 10 reps, and now you make that range of motion, however you elevate the heels or you do 1.5 reps, however, whatever way you want to approach it, you straight away make that movement far more difficult, okay? And that's just going with the same weight, okay? That's not adding any more weight, it's just taking it, which is increasing that range of motion.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think, Sean, did you mention tempos? You're a fan of tempos, aren't you?
Yeah, I just, the biggest thing for me with tempos is, just the time under tension. And what the goal with the time under tension is to create a bigger muscle. So a bigger muscle has the potential to be a stronger one. So, I mean, my favorite type of tempos would be like 6-0-0s. And then you can even put a pause in with the tempo. So if you just have like a kettlebell with goblet squats, you could go with a 5-second tempo and then a 3-second at the bottom, and then work on the force output through the concentric phase, which is coming up. So if you think about having a barbell on your back, so obviously you can't have it now if you only have a kettlebell, but what you can work on is the force that you're outputting on the concentric phase, because that will cross over really well. So if I only had access to a kettlebell and I was doing a tempo, I would definitely be incorporating, maybe a 3 to 6 second tempo down, and then maybe a bit of a pause at the bottom, ask the grass, because the knee extensors, the quads, so you want to have them at the greatest range of motion, which is at the ask the grass phase. And a lot of the time we don't get the opportunity to train at that range, so you have to have super light loads with a Frankenstein front squat or a goblet squat, and you're just reinforcing, a greater range in the quads. And then what you can do from there is really drive into the quads and work on the force output, something that you can't always work on in the normal powerlifting program. But aside from that, if you had limited equipment, you could definitely be working on your work capacity by incorporating stuff like complexes. So if you only had a barbell, you could have a row movement in there, a squat movement in there, a press movement in there, and you could probably have a hinge in there as well. So if you work up to 5 rounds, five reps of each exercise by 5 rounds, you'll build the work capacity really fast, and you'll build the hypertrophy as well in the muscle.
Yeah, and like tempo work definitely is very useful in terms of increasing the time under tension, increasing sort of and it gives you a really good chance, as you're saying, to enforce cues and to enforce positioning, which can help with increasing hypertrophy. And yeah, just one thing that probably, say with tempo work, a caveat I'd like to add, or even just get your thoughts on, for people, say, because I use a lot of tempo work, it's in regular programming, it's probably the main exercise I will use. It's super specific and it allows us to really work on our competition lifts. But for people with really limited equipment right now, one thing that I've found, or at least thought about, is they may not be able to get sufficient mechanical tension in their muscles with tempo work if the load is too light. If we're working in like our traditional ranges, traditional sort of set and rep ranges. Because let's say if someone has access to only a small kettlebell that isn't enough to sort of push them anywhere near difficulty at say 6, 8, 10, 12 reps, where we'd normally have them. If we just increase the tempo on it, while we make the lift more difficult, it doesn't necessarily increase the actual damage to the muscle itself. So something that could be quite useful for people is just increasing the rep ranges away from where we'd normally have them. Sort of like proximity to failure, or like basically how difficult an exercise is or how many reps in reserve we have, is going to be one of the primary sort of indicators of hypertrophy, or one of the primary things that will allow us to grow. There isn't a huge difference in hypertrophy between like if you were to push something close to max at 8 reps as if you were to push it close to max at 25 reps or 30 reps. In terms of actual muscle hypertrophy, there isn't a massive difference at all. The reason why we as powerlifters stick to the lower end of the rep ranges is because of that neural training that we're talking about. We're trying to train our nervous system and train technique with heavy weights because our goal is a 1 rep max in competition. So getting hypertrophy with 25 reps makes no sense to us normally, when we can get the same hypertrophy with 8 reps and improve our technique, or with 4 reps. But right now, for people with limited equipment, training into that higher range will allow them to train one of the things that we're looking for, which is muscle hypertrophy. It'll give us an opportunity to do that if we have limited equipment, even for people with just body weight, even people doing body weight training right now, if that's all you have. If you can increase the difficulty, if you can increase the range of motion, if you can increase the tempo to an extent where you're able to get near failure at a very high rep range, anywhere 20 plus reps, you're still going to be in a position where you'll still put yourself in a position where you can grow muscle.
Yeah, 100%. That's really good. That's really, really good. And I think it's important to note, like, if hypertrophy is the aim for someone, they do want to come near that almost fatigue zone. Okay, like if you're doing 8 reps and you can do probably 15 or 20, you need to start changing one of the variables. So you need to change, like Steve said, the tempo. You need to increase the range of motion, increase the amount of reps, increase the amount of sets. Just something to increase the difficulty, basically. Okay, so hypertrophy is the aim. One of the things we do need to work towards is that muscle fatigue. Okay, I could be wrong, but I think it's within 3 reps in reserve. It's around about there. Hypertrophy starts to kick in. We want to be hitting around there. So if you're leaving a set of whatever kettlebell squats with 10 or 12 reps in the tank, you probably need to change change 1 or 2 aspects of it at least. Okay. And just
pick
what? Yeah, go on, Steve.
Sorry, just one thing I want to add on that is just sort of dogma over exercise selection. If you're in a position where you're picking exercises based off of your equipment and it's limited right now, you may have to change towards exercise that you wouldn't do in normal training. Like, as you're saying, if you have a kettlebell and you're doing like front goblet squats with it, and you're sort of ending 10-15 reps away from failure, it's probably not going to do a whole pile of good to you. So changing to a less specific exercise, training in a different plane of motion, whether it's single leg work, whether it's switching to like side lunges, whether it's switching to a different exercise entirely that can get you closer to that, closer to failure, is probably going to give you more bang for your buck right now.
Yeah. And then another thing just to add on to that as well is, say you have a plate. Let's say you have limited equipment. So say we'll have a plate. So if we put a plate on top of your back for a press up, and you're going through the press up, not only overloading the triceps, but you're also getting a great hit on the core. And it's one of the most underutilized elements of powerlifting is, an efficient core. And I think that's something that we can really take away from periods like this is like working on things like your core. I mean, you've seen it a million times. Inefficiency in the core leads to breakdown, and a lot of people just don't know how to train it. So things like, if you have a band, you could do like pull-off presses and like an RKC variation of the plank. But I think that even if you look at your old training videos for people who don't necessarily have a coach, but if you have like knee cave or stuff like that, this is the perfect time to be working on that type of stuff, using sort of mini bands, because if you have any type of knee cave at all, it's probably coming from your glutes. So this is a good time to work on like floor slides, hamstring curl floor slides, things like clams on the glutes, and just sort of walks. I mean, this is because when we go to physio, right, and he gives us these sort of exercises to do, and then you're trying to fit them into your training regime, and sometimes it's not, time sometimes doesn't allow us to do that. So now we have all the time in the world to be working on those sort of small weaknesses.
Yeah.
And I think when when we're given that prehab stuff, whether it be from a physio or a physical therapist or whatever it may be, it might be just be your own coach. We kind of overlook that a small bit because we are so narrow focused. Our tent is very much on squat, bench, deadlift, 1RM, or that specific training. And I think going through periods where you're very focused like that is brilliant, okay? Like into a lead up to a competition. That focus is kind of expected. But I think having periods throughout your training year where your focus is a bit broader, okay? Maybe you're, not that your heart isn't in it, but it's just you're looking at different things. So for example, this time we might look at some hypertrophy, okay? Or, you know, we might look at some low level cardio or whatever it may be. I think it's a mindset shift from going from extremely intent on being the best powerlifter I can be to being, now I'm going to branch out a small bit and I'm going to get better at a couple of things. And this is the perfect time for it. And I think we summed it up pretty well, that if you have a bit of equipment, you can get an awful lot done. You're not as limited as you think. It just might mean that, okay, you can't do your traditional squat, bench, deadlift in the set rep ranges that you generally do. You might just have to change that around ever so slightly. And it probably won't be that much of a change. And as the lad said, working on your weaknesses, because every single person has something bilaterally they can improve on, or some issue with a core deficiency of some sort. Everyone has something, a small bit of an imbalance from left to right. I think it's only human to have that. But use this time to work on that. And maybe we might just touch very shortly on just if somebody has no equipment, okay, and for whatever reason they have no access to nothing. And I think the way I look at it again is if you're just a beginner to powerlifting, there's still an awful lot you can get done with just your body weight. If you're in that top percent in the country, being honest, you probably have equipment at home, and this probably won't apply to you. But definitely, if you're in that beginner to intermediate range, there's a lot of stuff you can get done with just your body weight. For example, even myself, throughout my training plan, I regularly put this into the people I coach is Nordic curls. I think they're a fantastic movement, and they tick an awful lot of movement patterns that I'd be looking for. So again, and Steve would have taught me this idea of getting a good position with our pelvis and our rib cage, and I think the Nordic, an eccentric Nordic, really works on that and really gives us a chance to load our hamstrings and our hips. Is that something what's your go-to bodyweight ones, lads?
So it depends on the person, really. In terms of actual exercise selection, for most people who are limited to bodyweight equipment right now, it's safe to say it's reasonably common that they wouldn't have been powerlifting for too long to be in a position where they had got any equipment before this lockdown went down, right? Which is actually a huge positive for them right now in that respect, because there's exercise that they can train quite hard. For a lot of people who are beginning, a strict push-up or just variations of push-ups are going to give you a huge training effect right now. In fact, for a lot of people right now, a strict bodyweight push-up is probably going to be harder for them than training bench for the same sets and reps. Chin-ups, push-ups, you don't get the technique sort of component that you get out of barbell bench. It's not 100% transferable that way, but in terms of muscle growth and muscle activation, more or less identical. Same muscles work, it's a horizontal press. So push-ups are something I have basically everyone doing right now. So in terms of, and for Orla Salan, you literally just asked about bench press. One of the first exercises that I would recommend to everyone to do in general is push-ups, even for people even when we were training normally, for beginners and basically for all the girls I coach, because for girls it's much harder to get upper body hypertrophy. Having a bodyweight movement that you can push for so much volume, I've always found to be really useful. So just getting better at push-ups is a big one. Inverted rows are a good exercise. Single leg lower body work, whether it's your split squats, single leg RDLs, side lunges, are all good exercise to pick from, which will give you growth in those in the main muscles we use, the primary movers for powerlifting. And then outside of that, your core exercises, as Sean was saying, pallet press, you have Copenhagen planks. These sort of things will all give you a lot out of bodyweight work.
Yeah. And then to add on to that about your comment about the press ups, so when you look at the bench and where it breaks down, if it breaks down from the chest, if it breaks down from sort of the chest to mid range, you're sort of looking at, you've got weak front delts and a weak pecs, but beyond that, it's always triceps. So what I like to do with press ups, especially in the current crisis, is change the ranges. So like you could do it on your knees or on your toes, whatever, but come closer, like a closer grip. So you're doing the press up, but you're smashing the tricep and you're almost overloading it, you know, because the closer your grip on the press up, the more taxed your triceps become, and you know that will cross over really well down the lane.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a good point. And I think even to add in, just while we're on the bench press, it's probably like if you have a kettlebell and a band, there's a lot you can do. Even just simple frontal raises and single arm presses, all that kind of stuff, that all adds up, because in a lot of powerlifting programs, for beginners and intermediates, as I said, there is bilateral work in probably 2 or 3 sessions a week for most people. So to be doing it now and have that be your focus is probably a good approach. I know it might sound a little bit silly, but if we think of bench press, it's probably the most technical of all the 3 movements. Okay, and I think even people who are powerlifting years are still working on different technical aspects. And I don't think there's anything wrong with setting yourself up and even working on getting a good high chest position and working on squeezing up those hips, because that's stuff that you would be working on, even if you're 3 and 4 and 5 years powerlifting. So if you're only powerlifting a year or 6 months or whatever it may be, bench press is probably the one you can do with probably out anything. Maybe a broomstick, but you can work on aspects of technicality, of getting a real good tight arch and getting the feet in a good position, and all you're left to do is just put the bar in your hands.
Yeah. And just a slight tangent from that, just different direction for people who are new to training. It's become more, I think it's probably because of social media, and powerlifting is just becoming more available and more embedded in like Irish culture. But a lot of people are getting into powerlifting straight off the bat now in training. So a lot of like beginner powerlifters are actually just beginners to strength training, or they haven't been strength training that long. Whereas before, because powerlifting had sort of hit a lull in Ireland, and it's only recently emerged in the last like 4, 5, 6 years again, to any notoriety. A lot of the best powerlifters you see in Ireland right now had 5, 6, 7 years in the gym just training before they ever heard of a powerlifting beat. So a lot of people who've begun powerlifting recently have sort of skipped the stages that you didn't see from a lot of the top lifters around the world, which is just getting very strong, very broadly strong. And particularly right now, as like training methodologies have improved, and like just like the structure of programming and things have changed towards higher specificity. Outside of like your squat, bench, and deadlift, most people aren't very strong at any other movements. A lot of people just aren't. We're so hyper specific with squats, bench, and deadlifts that we're incredibly good at those. But like I know people who can deadlift 2.5 to 3 times body weight who struggle with a set of 5 chin-ups. Yeah. There are areas that you can definitely work on in terms of like building a base right now, which will actually have a lot of carryover down the line, like training with body weight. And working on those areas that you maybe sort of training that level that you've maybe skipped as you sort of as people go straight into powerlifting can be very useful.
Yeah. And then just off that point, it's like you can be training movements that you're notoriously weak for, like female powerlifters in Ireland, especially the ones that I would know, they could have maybe up to a 90 kilo bench press, but they would struggle to overhead press 40 kilos. So this is a good time to really work on those weaker movements. And it carries over well into power lifts. So if your overhead press goes up, you can be as assured that your bench press potentially will go up as well. But another thing that I was thinking of, and you know, comes into the psychological aspect of what we're talking about, is we're talking, what if people don't have the equipment? But what if people do have it and they just don't have anybody? So I was listening to a podcast recently with Joey Flex, and he was on the King of List podcast, and he was talking about Jonathan Keiko, who was due to go to a world championship, but he has no equipment. But even if he did, how's he going to self-rack out 240 kilos? You know, it has a psychological effect. He's been working so hard to get to that championship, and then it was just taken away from him. So there's a psychological effect, you know, as we go up the ladder into the higher levels with people. I mean, like, people are so, like, powerlifters on the whole are, you know, they're structured. I mean, if you look at the USAPL, they'll have their Raw Nationals in October, Arnold's in March, and then Worlds in June, right? But now they're gonna make Worlds in September, and then expect them to go a week later and do Raw Nationals, because the rule is that if you don't do Raw Nationals, then you don't go to Worlds. So, like, there's a psychological challenge for people across the spectrum, not just people with limited equipment, but also the people who may have the equipment but have to change their whole calendar year.
Yeah, and even outside of that, I find I'm very social when I train. I suppose just the community in City Gym has sort of lent to me being social. You know, like, I like training with a group of people, and that's one of the things I've struggled with, because I'm in a position, I'm very lucky, where I have a full setup at home. You know, I have a power bar, I have more plates than I need. You know, I have dumbbells, I have everything really. But I do find it quite hard to bring that same intensity to training, you know, without people around me, and without the competition calendar being set. You know, I wouldn't have had any major competitions coming up, but even without knowing, you know, what regional comp I'm going to sign up for, what I'm going to do, where's the end goal, it can be hard to train in that respect. So coming to terms with that is probably going to be difficult for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. So I actually made a note of that. It was earlier on, and it was on the idea of, like, powerlifting is becoming very much a team sport now, I think. Okay, I think a couple of years ago you had individuals, but now it's very much a collective group. And like City Gym and Strength Militia and Abs in Dublin, and they thrive, and the club is built on this team motto, you know, this team ethos. And I even noticed that, you know, with our own group down in Tremor there, like, we were starting to get some really good team sessions, and it's so much more enjoyable. And to have that cut, you know, all of a sudden, without kind of warning, it's definitely going to play a massive psychological, like a psychological, you know, like a negative, I suppose, really. But like, it's how can we handle it? And I think if you're a lifter right now, and you're kind of like, you know, your routine is a bit thrown out of kilter, small bit, you know, just stepping back and just asking yourself why you got into it in the first place, you know, and start from there and work forward, because you'll probably find that you're more intrinsically motivated than you realize, and that all leads back to the team as well. But once you kind of nail down why you're lifting in the first place, I think it'll make that, you know, it'll make the separation from your team. It's only a short separation, and we are going to come back to normality. But I do think it's, especially on like the places like City Gym, where like the atmosphere is electric inside there, and to go from that to lifting at home must be difficult, like, you know. And there's tons of, you know, examples like that, Steve, I presume.
Yeah, like, it can just be difficult, but then I suppose that's one area that we're lucky in right now, is that this happened in a time where we have social media. You know, we're able to do things like arrange this call to talk through these things, and I think that's something that people probably have to lean on even more right now, because social media can be quite consuming and can be quite detrimental in a lot of ways, you know, in terms of comparing yourself to people and the pressures that come with it. But as a support network right now, it will be very useful for a lot of people, you know, even just in terms of that motivation you'd normally get in the gym from training alongside other people, or whether it's the person you aspire to be, or whether it's someone that, you know, you just like training with, or whichever. that's probably going to come from a more remote setting now, and maybe adjusting to that's going to be a big thing.
Yeah, I agree. The whole social aspect of social, the social aspect of social media, like you say, even with this call, but you know, it's grabbing a few people within your community and like organizing something like a quiz, like something that we've done in the last few weeks, and you know, it's just keeping the banter and the crack flowing, you know, as it would be in the gym, but it's just in a different setting. So, you know, there's ways to, you know, if you look at the negative of the situation and follow news and all this here, like it's going to have a negative impact on you. I mean, you have to take the good out of the situation, and that's always been something that I've lived by. Like every situation has good and bad, and if you focus too much on the negative side of it, then you're always going to come out worse. But if you try and see the good in it, so the good in it is maybe like making a goal that you're going to read a book or you're going to improve on like a certain exercise, or so it doesn't even have to be anything to do with training. It could be, you know, you're so busy in life that you prep your food, you know, 3 days in advance, but now you have the time to actually take time and cook a meal. That could be something, and then after this is over, like make it a goal to do that once a week. So I think that the whole social aspect of, you know, the situation, if you look at it from like the positive, then there's always going to be a good outcome.
That makes a lot of sense, Sean. And it is a mindset approach, and I think it is what you were saying. Like there's positives and negatives to everything. It's just a matter of what way you're going to look at it, you know. And yeah, I think the winner, you know, people will have to they will eventually push towards that more positive mindset, because we're probably looking at a couple more weeks of it, you know. Just want to just change gears here ever so slightly, lads. But that's really, really good. Like for someone between now and the end of just going to call it normality, okay, when we get back to normal, like, there's something possible there for all of us. You know, so for me, there's plenty there. So if you have a tiny bit of equipment at home, there's loads you can be doing. If you have absolutely nothing and you're a beginner, there is plenty you can be doing as well. Okay, if you have nothing and you're in the top percent, you're probably going to have to invest somewhere, or else just take the hit and your gains are going to be a little bit slower coming back. Okay, so what we might look at now is returning to training. Okay, so we're back in our team environment, our team sessions, whenever that may be. Okay, what are we looking out for as powerlifters? What are the red flags we want to be? Because if we think of it from a literal point of view, you've gone 5 or 6 weeks without socializing with your friends, underneath a barbell maybe. They're going to be really excited to get back training. So what happens if we don't control that excitement, structurally or programming properly? So some of the pitfalls we might look out for. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that you should avoid running back and thinking that, you know, just cramming in hypertrophy is going to be the answer, because it's not. And chances are, if you run before you can walk, you're going to pick up like an adductor strain, say, if you're squatting over 7-8 reps. I mean, if you think about it, if you go back and went straight into like 70-80% work for 8 reps, the DOMs you're going to get off that first session is going to last you like a week, 10 days. You know, so to take a different spin on it, what I would be advising is coming in and just going through competition movements, and just looking at like doubles, triples for a couple of sets. I mean, take the time to enjoy the training again, because if you run in and start doing something that you just left before everything shut down, you're going to run into either one, an injury, or two, a strain that you're going to be carrying for more than likely the rest of the year.
Yeah, like over eagerness is probably the one thing to avoid, because nobody sets out to hurt themselves when they go to train. Well, most people don't set out to hurt themselves when they train. But like the worst thing you could do when all of this is over is go back in, train too hard and injure yourself, because all you've done now is delayed a period of time you can't train properly for. So while you might not like it, taking a few steps back, like Sean was saying, working where you are, one of the first things that happens when you sort of start training and when you return to training is you get that neurological response. Your nervous system starts training up again. So looking for that, training sort of low reps, training anywhere over sort of 60, 70% for the first few weeks on the lower volume side in those movements is going to help. And one thing the biggest factor I think that will decide what you do when you go back is what you do before you go back. And you have to be honest about that, because if you train really hard right now and you're in a position to, and it isn't a good or a bad thing whether you do or not, because this whole situation sucks and there's things going on outside of powerlifting right now. So if you're in a position where you're able to train hard physically and mentally, you're going to be in a position where you can probably return to play a bit faster on the other side than if you don't do anything at all. And if you don't do anything at all, one of the most important things to acknowledge is the fact that you didn't do anything. And that rushing back too fast is going to be detrimental to you. It's not going to help make up for lost time. Any lost time now or any efforts that you don't put in, they're lost. You have to cut your losses on them. And you work from where you are. When you return to play, you have to acknowledge sort of what's happening. A broad rule of thumb that I have been using recently, which has been quite effective for people returning from injury, because for a lot of people with limited equipment whose training is affected, there's a lot of parallels to someone who's injured right now in terms of, work capacity is going to drop down, the exercises you can pick are compromised. So the actual return to play will be similar to coming back from an injury. And a broad rule of thumb that's been useful is however long you take off from training, it'll probably take you about half that period of time to get back to full work capacity. So if this goes on 2, 3, 4 months, you might want to spend a training block or two trying to get back to where you were in terms of your workload, and before you really start pushing yourself again, because rushing back too fast will set you back longer in the long run. You'll lose more training over it. You won't see it straight away, but once you hurt yourself or if training starts coming backwards, you're just losing time.
Yeah.
That's I think accepting your body will take a bit of time to get back to where it was is really important, like what you were saying, Steve. We did make the point that detraining isn't going to be as sharp as what people think, and it's more in relation just to their overall strength, but their technical proficiency and their neural efficiency is going to drop off, and that is kind of worth mentioning. So if you have a person who can squat, we'll just say 200 kilos, they take 6 weeks and they haven't did anything over 70%, their estimated 1 rep max is probably going to come down a tiny bit, just for a short period of time, until we get a bit more technical proficient and that neural efficiency comes back up to speed. And it's not that you've gotten weaker, it's just that we need to get those two other areas back up to where they were.
Because for a lot of people, when you go back into training, you'll probably be really surprised at how much strength you've retained. Like if you were to max out, you'd probably be way closer to where you think to where you were before than you think. But what you can do and what you should do after this are not the same thing at all. And that's where you're going to see people sort of getting hurt, is people sort of working with what they can do and going in all guns blazing, sort of dipping their toe in the pool, realizing water isn't scary, jumping straight in and forgetting they can't swim. It's just not going to work out that well for people. You have to like sort of earn the right to train hard again.
Yeah, I think just to talk a wee bit about this is a lot of people who come into powerlifting come in, through things like sport or like circuits. They come to a gym and they try a circuit and then they find out that they want to go down the strength route. And the thing that they forget is like it's a lot easier to lose fitness than it is strength. So the auto response there is just to tie both of them together, because if you take a period away from the gym, from classes, or from a CrossFit gym, or from a sport, and you allow yourself to be detrained, it takes you a lot longer to get back up to speed in terms of endurance than it does with strength. So that's a thing with it. That's sort of a thing that I've sort of identified where people's fears lie.
Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, it is just working within the confines of that, because like, your fitness is one of the biggest things that protects you and allows you to train hard. So working and being patient with that is going to be a big thing, because while chasing strength is the goal, it's not necessarily how you get there. And just training heavy all the time isn't how you get there. That's why not every session that we do is hitting a 1 rep max, because if just lifting as hard as we could all the time was what will be most productive, that's what we do, but it isn't. So yeah, just working on building that fitness and building that ability to train again when you get back is going to be one of the most important things. And starting on the side of too little, erring on the side of caution will probably be more useful for people than erring on the side of too much and having to take some steps back afterwards. Like, a phrase that's become very popular in powerlifting recently is building momentum. And it's something that will be very important on the other side of this, because for a lot of people, you're essentially starting from a dead start again.
Yeah.
So building accordingly and building that sleeve and building that momentum from there is going to be important. Like, we're going to be lucky that for people who haven't been able to do a whole lot of powerlifting, you're going to be starting from a really high point in terms of your potential for strength gain, because even if you lose a load of strength, the rate at which it will come back will be very fast. Like, I was sort of injured or out of full training for over a year. I think it was about a year and a half. Once I sort of cleared my injuries and was able to get a good prep run to me, it was only about 2 or 3 months before I was hitting PBs again. So even if this does carry on for way, way longer than we think it will, strength will come around really fast on the other side of this, as long as you give yourself time to do it and you let yourself sort of build.
I think, yeah, that's brilliant, Steve. And like, if we think of how like an injury happens, it's going to be a spike in training load. Okay, so if training load is level across the way, an injury more than likely is never going to happen. Okay, bar a freak accident. But if we go from doing nothing for 5 weeks to doing 5 sessions a week, that's going to cause a massive spike in training load, and our tendons, our ligaments, muscle bellies in general aren't going to be able to tolerate that, and that's where we're going to pick up an injury. And as Steve said, instead of taking a step forward, you've now taken 2 steps back, and that's to be really, really mindful of that when we get back into this, whenever it may be. That from then on, we want it to be positive, we want it to be moving forward. If it's moving forward at like milli steps, it's better than moving back at a foot at a time. Okay, I think that's just to kind of sum up returning to training. Unless you want to add in anything on that, guys. Anything you want to put in, Steve or Sean?
If you're looking at powerlifting, so going forward, it's even off the back of this, and if you are a competitive powerlifter within Ireland, don't be rushing yourself. If they announce that there's going to be a meet in like 12, 16 weeks, don't rush yourself to get to that meet. Like wait, get a bit of training block behind you. There's going to be other competitions, and even if you do miss the cutoff for, let's say, next year's nationals, like don't worry about it. Longevity is the main goal here, and just keep it safe and enjoy getting back to training.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And yeah, just one small thing that probably in my head it makes a lot more sense than it does when I say it out loud. But a really important thing right now is for people to not quit. I think if people realize that all they do over the next while is not quit because they get fed up, you're going to put yourself in a position where you have potential to make progress again in the future. Even if you can't see it right now and you think there's no hope of making progress at all because you don't have access to a bar for the next 3 weeks and everything is ruined forever, if all you do is just don't quit over the period of time between now and it takes you to get back into the gym, if you go back to the gym when this is all over, you put yourself in a position where you can potentially make progress and do what you love again. So that's a massive thing. It's just not throwing in the towel right now, even though it can seem frustrating at times.
That sums it up really well, Steve. That's it in a nutshell. I think it's just trying to take as much positive from right now as we can, and that's really good.
Yeah.
And as you said, if we can come out the backside of this, be ready to train and go, do you know what? I got 2 sessions a week done for 3 weeks. That's a major plus. You get 3 sessions, even better. You get 4. You know, you're elected. Okay, but it's about getting the small wins, because God knows right now is a difficult enough time for a lot of people. Okay, for everyone. So getting any sort of win, whether that be physically through training or mentally through training, is brilliant for people. And I think that's worked. It's worth rewarding people and give people a pat on the back, and maybe not to beat yourself up too much if you're not in the mindset to do it as well. Okay, we're in a very strange situation that has never happened before. Just for anyone on the call there, lads, if you've any questions, right, if you want to pop them into the chat, if you don't, that's fine. I just want to thank the 2 lads. I just realized about halfway through that I never actually introduced the 2 lads, really. I never asked them a bit on their background, but I'm probably chatting to 2 of Ireland's best powerlifting coaches. 2 of the lads have been regular coaches in the Irish powerlifting setup for the last number of years, and I was delighted to get them on for our first podcast, Zoom, whatever you want to call it. So first of all, thank you to the lads, and on our next podcast, I would promise to introduce you. Just one question for Sean before he goes. Sean, in case anyone hasn't listened, was on King of the Lifts last week. Last week, Sean, was it?
Yeah.
Me or 6-pack Lapidat? Who presents better?
I like a Limerick man. You know, like all we're missing is a boron and a flute.
It can be arranged with a week's notice.
Yeah, a staple in any Limerick man.
I'll be back in 2 seconds. Just have to run. I'll be back in 1 second there.
No problem, Steve. Okay, we got one question, and we're gonna. So Orla was training 4 days a week and really missed the gym, but not the hours sitting in traffic and rushing. Thinking of doing 3 days a week when I go back for the summer at least. If I have a program designed for that, do you think it's possible to get the same strength gains on a 3-day program as a 4-day one? Okay. So Orla, to answer your question, I think going back 3 days is a really sensible option. Okay. So like we were talking about earlier, there is going to be that phase where we have regressed a small bit. So going back to a 3-day program sounds really good. We don't want any of those big spikes happening. Do I think it's possible to get the same strength gains on a 3-day program as a 4-day one? In the long-term approach, probably a 4-day, you would probably get more frequency to the competition movements, so it would probably be more beneficial that way. But right now, I would be more along the lines of that 3-day program is going to do you real well. As Steve said, if you've taken maybe 5-6 weeks without training, about half of that on that length of time on your 3-day program, and slowly work your way back to the 4-day approach. I think that's a real good. And you want to add in on that, Sean?
Yeah, like it just off the back of what you were saying. I mean, it depends on your goal, right? Like what is your goal, and you know what is, how long do you want to be doing the 3-day program for? You know, is it something that's going to be temporary? Is it, you know, going to run, you know, like less than 12 weeks, or is it something that you want to incorporate longer term? And if it's longer term, then what you have to do is prioritize, you know, certain movements in the training block. So obviously, the way I would look at it is, you know, have competition work in there somewhere, something that's going to build the weakness and something that's going to build the muscle, and then you can build sort of a program around that. And if it's 3 days for now, then that's fine. But if you, over time, as Dara was saying, if you want to, you probably want to look at increasing that to increase the frequency.
Okay. So question, anything else then we got? Any thoughts on blood flow restriction I wouldn't be a specialist on it. Steve or Sean, have you any thoughts on blood? I'll be honest, I just don't know. I haven't done enough research on it, and I don't want to give you information that mightn't be 100%. Steve or Sean, have you much experience with blood flow restriction training?
I haven't really done too much blood flow restriction, but I know that Chris Duffin's a massive advocate of it, and he likes to sort of use it so that you restrict the blood, and so you can get using the quad. So let's say in a squat, he restricts it so his main quad muscles are working a lot more, than if he wasn't like wrapping the band around his hips. He would probably not get to use the full belly of the quad as much. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, it's actually, I'm glad this is brought up, because it was something I meant to bring up earlier and completely forgot about. Blood flow restricted training right now is going to be really useful for a lot of people, as long as the one thing would be learning to do it safely, because essentially with blood flow restriction, what you're doing is you're tying the entry to a limb. You tie the entry to a limb with like a tourniquet, or I've seen some people using like wrist wraps or knee wraps to tie them, because essentially what you're doing is like cooling blood in your limb muscles and training them. And for people right now, it has a huge hypertrophy benefit in anything it's been studied in. On untrained individuals, just walking with blood flow restriction to their legs showed big increases in quad muscle. So it definitely does have a benefit right now, particularly for people with limited equipment. For a lot of my people, I've been using blood flow restriction training, or building them to a place where I can use blood flow restriction training. So as the weeks have went on, basically into program restructured, and it's been one of the things we're implementing just because it's going to give people a lot of bang for buck in terms of training. With blood flow restriction, most of the time you're looking for really high reps. Most of the original protocols were done with a really specific set and rep range. So it's done where you do one set to like a 30 rep max. So you do a 30 rep max, you take 10-second break, then you do a set of 15, 10-second break, set of 15, 3 times. And that's the protocol that people used for training it. And it can be used really well. Like if you were to put it into a program, I'd probably do it at the end of a session as almost an exercise to finish it out, because you're not going to be able to do anything after you do it to any major intent. But it does definitely have, it does definitely carry a lot of weight right now with equipment restrictions. So it's probably something to look into. As Sean was saying, like Chris Duffin is probably the guy to look up when it comes to it, because he has a lot of information out on it, on how to implement it, But yeah, it is definitely something that could be useful.
Okay, guys, that's brilliant, and there's no more questions, just more thanks, and you should definitely do this again. Well, I'm be honest, or I'm surprised we got through session 1. I'm happy with that, but yeah, we'll definitely want to try and make this a bit more regular. Guys, the 2 lads, thank you very, very much, and for everyone that tuned in and for the lovely words, thank you all very much. Hopefully we'll be chatting to you all again soon. In the meantime, stay safe and take care.
Thank you, Mark.
Pleasure, guys.